and welcome back to the Creators Circle. I'm your host, Lucy, and today we are here with special guest Victoria. She is an artist, and we're going to get all into what she creates and why she creates it. So, without further ado, I introduce Victoria.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. And I wanted to start off, I saw a recent post of yours where you kind of went into your story and why you decided to pursue art. And so I wondered if you could share that with us now and with the viewers who haven't seen your post yet.
Yeah, of course. So I've been painting since I was a kid, but I never took it seriously, it's just kind of a side passion, if you will.
Mhm.
And like 10 months ago, last fall, like I got injured. So I couldn't work out. I couldn't like do anything to, I guess, release all the stress and tension and all that. So I started painting again because all throughout college, I didn't paint. I was like so busy and things get in the way. And so I was like, okay, let's start painting again. So I started painting this giant like piece of work, and it was kind of gothic and emo just because like I was kind of in my feels, like I couldn't do something that I loved. So it kind of opened another door of like, oh, maybe I should pursue this since I'm graduating. I need to find something to do.
Mhm. And so that's
Yeah.
really interesting. I had no idea that you even got injured. What happened?
Um, well, it wasn't a huge deal, but like 10 months ago, so I was at the gym and like my joint popped out on my like lower back. And so now I've been dealing with that. It just likes to pop out whenever it feels like it. And so it gets like super painful and I can't like stand. Sometimes like my leg goes numb. Like it's just, back issues.
Yeah, no,
too.
that is
So
intense. Wow. And
yeah.
so I know that for myself, I'm not a good example for good posture, I'm sure. But when you're painting, especially, at least I find that I'll end up in really awkward positions and then I'll stand up and be like, wow, that was not good for my back. Um,
Right. Yeah.
do you feel like your injury ever comes like in the way of that, or do you just find a way around it? Like, how do you deal with that?
Well, I did physical therapy, so like now it's much, much better.
Mhm.
But I guess during that time, like it wasn't bothering me too much. Luckily, because like I was either standing or I was like sitting, but not for super long period of time. Like I wouldn't paint all day. I would
Right.
just paint in between like classes and school. Um, and then now, like, I have the terrible habit of painting on the floor.
Yeah.
And as you may know, like, you're like hunched over, and
Yes.
then you'll get up and you're like, oh my God, like,
Yeah.
it's a bad habit. But like, I don't have the space currently to have like a table to sit at and have all of my junk on,
Mm.
you know?
Yes, I can relate. I'm sitting here at my desk right now, and if I turned my camera around, it's covered in junk, so I can never work here. So I usually move everything to my dining table, but then I end up like standing over it, doing whatever, and like I said, I'll get up and be like, that was probably not a good idea. So yeah. Well, so you mentioned that you started painting a long time ago, but you started college and just life got in the way. Um, what do you think inspired you once you got back? Was it, you mentioned it was like gothic kind of emo. Was it that emotion that you felt being, taken out of what you wanted to do, which was like work out and things like that? Or was it a previous inspiration? Where do you think it came from?
So throughout college, it's kind of been a journey as it is for everyone, but like for me personally, I was trying to grow up a little mentally and like learn about philosophy. And I was meeting a bunch of people that were into like Buddhist philosophy and stuff like that. And I decided like, I don't know, maybe over a year ago to like I need to change my mindset and get out of like that pit of like it's not depression, but it's just kind of like pessimist thoughts of like, like, will I ever amount to anything? And like, you know, because like college, I don't know, it kind of took a toll on me. So it was super hard.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, I decided to like have a mental change of like, oh, seek discomfort. Let's do things that push me out of my boundaries and like,
Hmm.
you know, make me scared, but in a good way, you know, to grow. And so, you know, putting my art on display, that's something that scared me because people can judge it. People could say, oh, it's not even worth the price you put on it. And I'm like, well, it's just my art. Like,
Yeah.
if it's catered to you, sorry. But like, someone's gonna buy it at the end of the day. Um, and so a lot of my art is rooted in the factor of seeking discomfort and Buddhism and oddly enough, Catholicism, like there are some hints in there that I just haven't said anything about, but I'm like, this is where it came from.
Wow. That's really interesting. And I really like what you said about that putting your art on display is scary. And that's something that I touched on in the first episode when I was explaining like what I wanted this show to be about is the fact that just being an artist in general is very vulnerable because you're putting not only like your thoughts and emotions into your work, whatever kind of work it is, but then putting it on display for the world to see and critique. And like you said, maybe somebody says, it's not worth the price you're paying or whatever. Um, that's really tough to hear sometimes, especially when it's literally a piece of your soul that you're putting out there. And so, you know, I really appreciate that you mentioned it. And I wanted to say that I think a lot of artists might come into the space worried about how much their work is worth and then end up undervaluing it as a result of, you know, like this fear that it's not worth something else. And I just want to encourage all artists, including yourself, to value yourself for what you really believe it to be worth because it's a part of yourself. You know, you don't want to undervalue yourself, so don't undervalue your work. And to another point that you mentioned, college is definitely a really interesting space because for me at least, I felt like I was doing my best, you know, pretty well. And COVID happened and all this stuff. I was like, man, the world is just working against me in a number of ways. But it felt like so many other kids, because I was in the business school. And so all these kids are like, got it together. They have like internships. They're interviewing in January for a job in May or something. I was like, am I supposed to be somewhere I'm not? Because I don't know. And so I definitely relate to what you were saying. Like, I just don't know how everybody else seemed to have everything together. And I think it's really very unique and mature of you to seek a different perspective and say, I want to change my mindset. I don't think a lot of people at your state in life are thinking about their mindset. You know what I mean? I think a lot of them are just focused on whatever. And so that's really cool as well. And so when you were painting, you know, in between classes and things like that, were you, you know, using your existing understanding and things that you had researched or whatever to put something on paper, or were you coming up with an idea? Like, did you walk into it with this is what I'm going to paint, or did you start painting and then decide this is where the story is going? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, so I started that first piece. It's called Walter Number One.
Mhm.
And I knew I kind of wanted hints of like nostalgia for me. And for some reason at that time, or I guess every fall at this rate, like anything that has skulls on it, I'm here for.
Yeah.
I'm not much of a fall person, like, I'm summer all the way, because like, you can go outside even if it's 110 degrees. Um,
Mhm.
but, like, fall, like, every time I'm in fall, I'm like, "You know what? The skulls are gonna keep me going." I love the little skeletons, they're adorable.
Yeah.
So, I started researching about, like, skeletons because 'cause I've never painted a skeleton, but I kinda knew, like, I wanted a checkerboard background because of Vans, and as an eight-year-old, I thought Vans checkerboard shoes were so, so cool, and they were so trendy, like, Justin Bieber wore them, so I wore them. But, like, I did kind of just play around with what I wanted. I did sketches on my iPad first. I've been doing that recently, instead of using my like paper sketchbooks.
Mhm.
Because it's like easy on the go, like you can bring it anywhere, it's very convenient. And I had just gone in. So it kind of permitted me to like try digital and like transfer it on a big canvas. So it was really interesting to play with that. And I use techniques that I've been using since I was a kid. Like I prefer acrylic painting over anything else just because like that's the most familiar medium with me. So yeah.
Yeah, and so in my own experience, I sometimes struggle to paint something that I feel like has a deeper meaning. Sometimes I find myself, I'm like, I just want to paint because it's sort of mind numbing. Like you're not, watching something where you have to focus. You can just go with the flow. And so sometimes I'm sitting there and I'm like, but what does this really mean to me? Because I'm not really accessing anything deeper. I'm just sort of doing it to do it. And so you've mentioned a lot of like sort of Easter eggs and things that you put into your work. Do you sometimes ever do the just like the mind numbing painting for painting, or do you always come in or come at it with some sort of like emotion behind it and um, a story that you're trying to tell through it?
Um, so I would say when I'm sketching just freely, like either in my iPad or just on a sketchbook, yeah, that's going to be a lot more like just free. Like whatever I'm feeling, I'll just start scribbling or painting. Um, and usually like I get inspiration from like, oh, this happened today. Like I grab coffee with a friend or um, I don't know, like it could be anything throughout the day and maybe I was like, "Oh, this is really cool. I want to sketch this." Um, so it could be little things like that. I don't typically always go straight into painting. Usually I go through all my notes before I start painting like a piece of like this is how I want it to look and then I'll scroll through like Pinterest and look at color schemes and stuff like that because it turns out that the color scheme's really important. And I would just like paint with colors that I liked and then I would look at it and I'm like, "Oh, they don't really go together."
Mhm.
But I mean, it's all trial and error.
For sure. I think that that's a really interesting perspective, though. I mean, for myself, I'm um, by no means an artist that's like doing it day to day, but I do it for fun. And I don't think I've ever taken the time to really research what I want to do. And so I think that you come at it in a very like, I'm going to say the word calculated, but not really. But you put a lot behind it, which I think is really cool and probably a lot more meaningful in the end when you see all of these pieces that you had come together into this one final product. That's very cool.
Yeah.
And
Um
so, oh, go ahead.
um so I was very surprised with how much like an artist has to plan. I always thought like what you were thinking, like you just kind of go into it and you start like painting and stuff, which is true. I mean, totally true. But then on TikTok, I started following pages that like kind of showed the background of painting and how to like convert your paintings to sales and stuff like that. And so like it's it's a huge process. Like I didn't know either. So like it's all like I said, like a work in process of like what works on the internet and what doesn't and what's trending and stuff like that. So like finding the color schemes that kind of helps with like the aesthetics of someone's room and stuff like that. So that's why I kind of look at color schemes that are trending currently and try to implement them into my art, but sometimes, the colors don't always match.
Yeah. And so, do you ever feel like you get caught up in like what's trendy and trying to cater to the audience that is today? Or do you try to focus on what you want to say and do, regardless of if it's trendy or not?
Um, so my style of art personally is, I guess you could call it like pop art,
Mhm.
and I'm currently working on a piece that's pop art. And I would say that's kind of trendy now, just that kind of digital art looking stuff and pops of colors and kind of almost like 80s theme, depending on where you are on the internet. Like on TikTok for me, like that's all I see, like these really pretty oranges and pinks everywhere. I don't necessarily follow that theme, but I do kind of fall in the pop art area. So I think it's kind of trendy, at least from what I'm seeing, but also I guess it depends on what you're painting, and like skulls aren't very all flowers and
Yeah.
unicorns, right?
No, pop art has always had a special place in my heart, especially because some of my family is from Pittsburgh, which is where the Andy Warhol Museum is. And so I've always had like the Campbell soup can like in my mind. And I really love all the color and all the bright things like that. It's interesting though how sometimes time is sort of circular, just like how records were a thing back then and then it went all digital and now records are coming back. Same thing with pop art. And so I think things like that, though, these large art movements are not really trendy so much as they're classic,
Yeah.
like it's something that's was cool then and maybe the newer generation didn't love it as much, but it's always going to be a staple and it will come back around and things like that. And
Mhm.
so that's very cool. And I love pop art, so I think it's really cool that you are sort of following that movement. And so what are you working on currently, or what can we expect to see in the future?
So the current piece that I'm working on, it's kind of I was having like certain feelings, like I'll explain to you kind of what it is. So anytime you go have like a really fun trip or like a weekend with your best friends, and then you go home and you're just like, oh man, that went by so fast and I'm kind of bummed. Like I have work the next day, right? Because I work two jobs. And so like I have to go to work on Mondays, right? Um, and that feeling of kind of like that, like you no longer have something to look forward to necessarily. Not in a pessimistic way, but it is. But I called it, like I just came up with the word happiness hangover.
um,
Instead of you being hungover on like alcohol, you're hungover on like that happiness. Like you're like, oh my God, this was the best weekend ever. And then you go back and you're like, oh, it's back to 9 to 5, back to business. So I was like, happiness hangover. So that's kind of the piece I'm working on right now. And that kind of theme of it's going to be pop art and bright colors. It's going to be very bright. So, and it's going to be small pieces. Last time I was working on very large pieces, but this time I decided on small pieces to possibly make it more affordable for prints and original copies. So, yeah.
that's really cool. I think you've just coined the next big term. That's really a great one. And I feel that when I went on vacation this summer, it was really disappointing to go back to work. And now I feel like every week I'm like, just Monday through Friday until I get to Friday afternoon, you know?
Right?
So yeah, that's really, really relatable and I can't wait to see it. When you work in smaller pieces, and obviously I don't know the exact size, do you feel like you still get to achieve the same level of detail, or like do you scale down the work? How do you go about changing, the size of what you're going to be working on?
So I usually prefer working on large surfaces. I mean, the last piece that I did was a 48 by 60. Yeah. So it was enormous. And I think it's so fun because you get to work on like little sections at a time. Although that was abstract, so it's not necessarily too detailed. But on little pieces, I find that like I can really go into details and really perfect like all the line work. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, which is like a good and bad thing, as we know. And so, like, working on the small pieces, I guess I can take a little bit more time to like be precise with all my line work and the colors, and I can work on it a little bit faster too, although this piece has taken me now like a few days and it shouldn't, but it has, um, because I'm just busy with work and all that.
Mhm. And do you ever feel like you mentioned that you're kind of a perfectionist, and I can relate. Do you ever feel like you try to make it too perfect? Like you finish, you put down your brushes for the day, and then you come back tomorrow and you're like, let me just work on this area a little bit. Yeah.
Totally. Like the amount of times I went back on my very first original piece, like I was still working on it like 3 months later, not working on it, just adding things as I go. Like I'd walk by and I'd be like, oh, it needs a gold tooth. Just adding something, even after like the original or like the photographers took pictures of it, I was like, oh no, I have to bring it back now and spend more money on it. But like, yeah, there's like a point where I have to tell myself, okay, that's it. Like that's all you can do unless I'm gonna go and really, really take my time and like redo a section, which has happened before. And it's like a pain. It's such a pain when like my mind wins and I'm like, okay, I'll just redo this section. And I'm like, why did I do that? It was fine. So I have to restrain myself sometimes and
I
just
think
call it
that
a
that's,
day.
yeah, I think that's a very artist perspective that you never feel like completely satisfied. Like I think you can get to the like 99%, but it's that 1%, that little voice in the back of your head that's like, it just needs this, you know? And it never goes away. But I think that as an artist, like again, you're putting a piece of yourself out there. So it's very important for you to feel like you're doing all that you can, you know?
Yeah.
So that is definitely something very relatable, I feel. And so when you are working, do you feel like you work your best during the day, at night, in the morning, or do you feel like I can just pick it up at any time of day and it doesn't matter?
So I kind of struggle with finding a really good routine um between juggling like my job and then this is like currently my side hustle. I haven't made it, but we will make it one day, I hope. But anyways, um so a routine for me is kind of difficult to like juggle. Just being me as a person, I'm very chaotic with my schedule. Like it's hard to focus on one thing at a time. And so that's just been kind of the struggle currently after leaving college. As we know, like we've been structured for so many years and now it's like up to us.
Mhm.
So I find myself painting usually in the afternoons. I get so, like, lethargic and tired in the afternoons, um, from, working in the morning and then having, like, that midday crash. So I'm like, "Okay, we have to stay awake, we have to paint." So it kind of brings me energy, it also relaxes me, so then, you know, by the time even evening rolls around, I'm not, like, jumping off the walls, like, too energetic. So it just kind of relaxes me. I mean, it's painting, so it's something that I like to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say in the afternoons.
I think it's just sort of a commonplace today for people to struggle with finding a schedule or a routine that like really works for them really well. And I think in the world of like TikTok and all of that, where you have these content creators that that's their job, they don't go to a 9 to 5 necessarily. And so they say like a day in the life and they wake up and they like make their smoothie and then they go to the gym and it's so idealistic, and I find myself even struggling where I'm like, well, why can't I just do that and then paint whenever I want and create all the time and just have that outlet. But the reality is that like most of us, we have to work, and those
Yeah.
hours are not up to us. And so even if when you in the moment might feel inspired, you can't necessarily like pursue it at that time. You have to come back to it later when you're at home or you have the materials in front of you. So and sometimes I feel like that's sort of like damaging to the idea itself, because if you are not pursuing it in the moment and you write it down or whatever, but then you come back to it later, it's kind of like when you wake up from a dream, you don't remember all of the details that you really wanted to include up front. And so
Yeah.
I even like I'll just write down sticky notes of a bunch of stuff that's in my head and I'll take it home with me, but then I come back to it and I'm like, I don't really know where I was going with that, but okay.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think, I wish we could all just do what we wanted all day long. But
Wish. I
yes.
wish, but I totally relate, like, writing down those notes that you, like, or those ideas that you get in the moment, and then you look back on it, like, hours later, and you're like, "Hmm, that's interesting." But
Yeah,
you no longer, like, feel that, like, high of that creator's flow and all that, so I totally get that because I have so many notes either in my phone or just, like, around in my sketchbook, and then I'll look at it, I'm like, "I don't know where I was going with that."
right. Yeah, I feel the same way. Or even I'll take down the note and then, life gets in the way. You come home, you have to have dinner, you got, you're going somewhere tonight, whatever. And you don't come back to it for, let's say, like days or weeks. And then you just find it by happens chance. And you're like, okay, now I really, really don't know what this was supposed to be. But it's so, it's sort of like heartbreaking because in the moment you're like, man, this is going to be great. Like, I know I can put it all together right now. I can see it and then it goes away. So, you know.
Yeah.
So I in particular I get very inspired, I guess, when I'm like driving to work for some reason because when I'm at work I'm busy. So there's nothing I'd have no time to find inspiration otherwise. But I find it when I'm driving and and then it's like you're driving, so what do you do? So I have to like try to get the voice talk to copy down what I'm trying to say, and then voice talk is never completely accurate, so then I'll read it back and it's like makes no sense. So
I totally get what you mean, like, for some reason, driving to places also brings me a lot of, like, inspiration, whether, like, it's to go get food or, like, meet up with a friend or go do work, like, I don't know why, but I guess because like, you have to focus on the road, right? But that's, like, all you're kind of focusing on and the music and stuff like that, and so I don't know, it's, like, peaceful to me that you're in control of the car and all you have to do is, like, drive, like, it's not too difficult. I mean, you know, despite Houston traffic. But, I don't know, it's very peaceful to me, and that's where a lot of ideas come to me, like, I guess I'm looking at the colors that are, like, in front of me and, like, what's going on, and, like, I'm just so at, like, peace with my thoughts that, like, the creative flow just starts coming. That's where like, I go on night drives very frequently, and that's where I get a lot of inspiration and random thoughts that I'll also use the voice to text thing. It
yeah,
doesn't work, like, it doesn't work, it's so, like, inaccurate, but
yeah.
it's fine.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, especially when you go on a drive that maybe you've never done before, you don't do as frequently, versus like your daily commute, you kind of see like the same thing, you pass the same landmarks, whatever. But if you go on a drive that you maybe never done before, or you're going somewhere that you don't go frequently, you notice something different. And that's where I find I'm like, oh wow, that's really cool. Um, but now I'm in the car, so what am I going to do with that? Well, so earlier you mentioned that you primarily focus on acrylic and that's your favorite and you're comfortable there. Do you like any other, you know, forms of paint? Do you like any other mediums of art? What or are you just in the painter's realm? Yeah.
So digital art has really piqued my interest too. I use Procreate and I've digitalized like a few of my paintings now, although it takes like a really long time and it's something that is constantly like changing and it's a lot to handle and learn with all like that digital stuff. Like it's always changing. But a few other like mediums that I like to do that are a bit more traditional is like soft pastels and just pen and a paper. I love doing that. and also oil paints. I love oil paints, but like they just smell so bad. Like I don't know if it's the ones I bought and that they're like freaking too old, but like using all the oils and cleaning the brushes, like it smells. And I remember like my art professor back in high school, like Miss Berry, she was like, "You're the only one who's going to be allowed to use the oil paints because they smell." And it clogs up like the plumbing and everything. I was like, sorry. So sorry. But yeah, it's not a medium that I go to very often, but I do like it because like you can continue painting for like weeks and it doesn't dry and like it's beautiful to mix and it's just a cool traditional art medium.
Yeah, I think I get into the sort of like kid in a candy shop type thing when I go to the art store and I'm like, wow, this is all great. Like I could do all these things. And then I get home and it's like facing the reality of these are, you have to be very meticulous about cleaning afterwards and it smells kind of bad and like all of those things that are I think like hindrances to people actually continuing to pursue a form of art. So the fact that you're like, I'll do it and I'll put up with all of these additional factors because of the result at the end, the colors and everything that you mentioned. So yeah, I hope that like other people will take away from that it's worth it in the end.
I mean, it's fun to just like play with new mediums, like, or like redoing your art in different mediums. Like, that's also a great way to just like have fun and practice too. Cause like you already have something, and
Yeah.
then you could just do it in different mediums. And, it gives you different effects, it gives you different textures, and it's fun. I mean, it's literally like you're in a candy store just playing and having fun and seeing all the cool like colors and different textures right in front of you with all the wrappers and everything. So it's just kind of fun.
It is. And so in to wrap it up, do you have anything, any advice or any just, whatever that you want to leave with the audience um, to wrap up today?
I would say seek discomfort. Like literally, if something scares you or you're kind of nervous, I think you should do it. Like, because you're gonna come out like a better person and like I don't know, like whether it's like applying to an art school or something, like the worst that will happen in that case is just no, like there's always another way to pursue something that you love, even if it's scary. So I think it's worth it despite all the obstacles.
Right. Yes, I was actually listening to a podcast the other day and I don't remember what it was, but it was somebody who said, I actually applied to art school, but it wasn't for 2 years until I got in. So, how many times did they try between that initial time and to the final acceptance before they didn't give up? And so that's very important you're going to be uncomfortable in life and sometimes it's worth it. And if it's not, try again and we'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us today. And I'm going to link all of her things on the show notes below so you can check out her website and her socials and follow her for more. Well, I'm sure we're all very excited and looking forward to that new piece, the happiness hangover that you mentioned. And so we'll be on the lookout for that. And then everybody else, just remember that we're dropping episodes every other week on Wednesday. So after this one, it'll be 2 weeks from now. And yeah, we'll see you next time.